The most feared duke chose the bride. All London mocked and fell silent when he lifted her veil. Iron-grey clouds hung over St. George's Church as London's elite gathered, their whispers sharp as needles against velvet. Ladies with ostrich feathers adorning their bonnets huddled together, fans fluttering to conceal smirking lips. Gentlemen adjusted their cravats, eyes darting toward the entrance where the Duchess of Pembroke had just arrived, her expression tight with anticipation. "One wonders if she will dare show her face at all," someone murmured, and a ripple of laughter spread through the assembly like poison in water. The cathedral's interior glowed with amber light from 100 candles, illuminating the polished pews where London's aristocracy sat in judgment. At the altar stood the Duke of Blackmore, his silhouette cutting a formidable figure against the stained glass. Even in this sacred place, none dared approach him without invitation. His reputation preceded him like a shadow. The man who had brought 3 earls to financial ruin with a single word, who had made a viscount weep in Parliament. The most feared man in England stood motionless, his face an impenetrable mask of cold authority. "I cannot fathom why he would choose her," Lady Maren Draycott hissed behind her fan. "The daughter of that disgraced scholar, a girl with neither fortune nor connections, worse yet, bearing that mark. Perhaps he lost a wager," replied Lord Hastings with a smirk that faded when the Duke's gaze seemed to find him across the expanse of the church. The organist struck a sombre chord. The massive doors swung open. The congregation turned as one, necks craning to glimpse the bride that London had mocked since the announcement 3 weeks prior. Through the doorway came not the expected procession, but a solitary figure in silver grey, a veil of matching hue obscuring her face completely. No father escorted her, no attendants preceded her, no flowers graced her gloved hands. Only a single white heather blossom pinned at her wrist broke the monotony of her appearance. "Good heavens, she comes alone," gasped the Countess of Blackwood. "Has she no family at all to stand with her?" "None that would acknowledge her after the scandal," came the swift reply. The bride, Miss Serene Halwyn, walked with measured steps down the aisle. Through the veil, one could discern only the faintest outline of features, yet her posture spoke of dignity that seemed incongruous with the disdainful glances following her progress. The whispering grew louder as she approached, cutting through the organ music like knives. "I heard her face would frighten even the bravest soul. They say her father died of shame. Even the veil cannot hide what she truly is." At the altar steps she paused, her veiled face turning slightly as though surveying the congregation. The Duke of Blackmore remained impassive, not moving to meet her, not offering his hand. The vicar cleared his throat nervously, clutching his prayer book with white-knuckled fingers. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice faltering under the weight of the Duke's unblinking stare. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. When asked if any knew cause why this man and woman should not be joined, a heavy silence fell, not of consent, but of collective restraint, for none dared speak against the Duke's wishes to his face, regardless of what venom they might later spill. "I, Serene, take thee, Rallian." Her voice emerged from behind the veil, unexpectedly melodious and steady, betraying no tremor of fear before this man whom even lords approached with caution. When the Duke spoke his vows, the temperature in the church seemed to drop. His voice was deep and clear, each syllable carved from ice, devoid of warmth or tenderness. "I, Rallian, take thee, Serene." He spoke as though issuing a command rather than making a promise. "The ring," prompted the vicar. The Duke withdrew from his waistcoat pocket a band of platinum set with a single black diamond. He took the bride's gloved hand with clinical detachment. A collective breath was drawn as the congregation leaned forward, wondering if he would lift the veil for the customary kiss. But the Duke merely placed the ring upon her finger and stepped back, leaving the veil untouched. "What manner of marriage begins without the groom seeing his bride's face?" Lord Pembroke whispered to his companion. "Perhaps he knows what lies beneath and cannot bear the sight," came the reply. Outside, raindrops began to patter against the stained glass, casting shifting shadows across the stone floor as the final prayers were uttered. The new Duchess of Blackmore stood motionless beside her husband, the veil stirring slightly with her breath, the only indication that a living woman resided within its confines. "I present to you the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore," the vicar announced. No cheers greeted this pronouncement, only the rustle of expensive fabrics as the congregation rose. The Duke offered his arm to his bride with the same detached courtesy one might extend to a stranger at a formal ball. Together they processed back down the aisle, the veiled Duchess maintaining a perfect distance, close enough to be proper, yet not so near as to suggest intimacy. As they passed, Lady Maren raised her lorgnette. "Mark my words, she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "That veil shall become her prison, for what husband could bear to look upon such a face by choice?" The Duke's step faltered, almost imperceptibly. The Duchess's hand tightened upon his arm, yet neither turned, neither acknowledged the barb. They continued their procession with regal dignity as rain began to fall in earnest outside, drumming against the church roof like impatient fingers. The Blackmore carriage cut through London's rain-slick streets, its black lacquered sides gleaming under the occasional gaslight. Inside, silence reigned as profound as that in a tomb. The newlyweds sat opposite one another, the Duke staring out at the passing cityscape, while his bride remained perfectly still, hands folded upon her lap. The veil hung undisturbed, offering no glimpse of her expression beneath. When at last the Duke spoke, his voice was measured, each word precise as a surgeon's knife. "You conducted yourself with appropriate dignity. I am not displeased." From behind the veil came a soft response. "Your approval brings comfort, Your Grace." "I have certain expectations for our arrangement," he continued, his gaze still fixed upon the rain-streaked window. "You will maintain the veil in public at all times. You will speak only when addressed directly. You will not entertain visitors without my express permission. Is this understood?" "As you wish, Your Grace." No inflection colored her tone, giving no indication whether these commands brought relief or distress. The carriage wheels splashed through a puddle, sending a spray of water against the window. "There will be a ball at Ironvale House in 1 week's time," the Duke said after a protracted silence. "The Tun expects to see my new Duchess. You will attend veiled and remain by my side throughout the evening. If I might inquire, Your Grace." She hesitated, then continued with cautious precision. "Would it not provoke greater speculation if I remain veiled indefinitely? The Tun feeds on mystery like ravens on carrion." The Duke's head turned sharply, his pale eyes narrowing as they fixed upon the veiled figure opposite him. "Would you prefer I parade you before their cruel scrutiny? Have you not endured sufficient mockery already, Miss Halwyn?" "Duchess of Blackmore," she corrected gently. "And I have found that what is seen, however briefly, loses its power to terrify. Imagination breeds crueler monsters than reality." The carriage lurched as it turned onto the long drive leading to Ironvale House, the Duke's London residence. Rain pattered more heavily now, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. "You speak of cruelty as though you were its student rather than its victim." "I have been both, Your Grace. As have you, I suspect." His gloved hands tightened upon his walking stick. "You presume much for a woman who owes her salvation to my charity. Forgive me, but I understood our arrangement to be one of mutual convenience, not charity." Her voice remained gentle yet unyielding as steel wrapped in silk. "You required a wife who would not intrude upon your solitude. I required protection from poverty and persecution, a fair exchange, I believed." The carriage came to a halt before the imposing facade of Ironvale House, a Gothic masterpiece of dark stone and intricate ironwork. Footmen rushed forward with umbrellas as the driver opened the carriage door. The Duke descended first, then turned, offering his hand to assist his bride. As she stepped down, the hem of her gown brushed against a puddle, darkening the silver-grey fabric. A footman gasped softly, then averted his eyes when the Duke's cold gaze fell upon him. "Welcome to your new home, Duchess," the Duke said, his tone betraying neither warmth nor hostility as they proceeded up the steps to the grand entrance. The doors swung open to reveal a solemn-faced butler and a line of servants, each with eyes carefully lowered in deference. "Your Grace," the butler intoned, bowing deeply, "may I present the staff of Ironvale House?" The Duke strode past without acknowledgement, but the veiled Duchess paused. "I am pleased to make your acquaintance," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the marbled foyer. "I look forward to learning each of your names in due course." A murmur rippled through the assembled staff, surprise evident in their exchanged glances. The Duke had already reached the staircase, his back rigid with displeasure at this unexpected delay. "The Duchess will require tea in her chambers," he said without turning. "Mrs. Winters will show you to your quarters," he added, addressing his bride directly. "I have matters requiring my attention in the study. We shall dine at 8. With that, he ascended the stairs, leaving his veiled bride standing in the foyer, the gathered staff watching her with undisguised curiosity. From their ranks stepped forward an older woman with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun, her black dress immaculate, her posture rigid. "If you would follow me, Your Grace," Mrs. Winters said, curtsying with mechanical precision. "I have prepared the Duchess's suite in the East Wing as His Grace instructed." As they mounted the staircase, the housekeeper added in a lower voice, "Might I inquire if you require assistance with your veil, Your Grace?" Not at present, Mrs. Winters, though I thank you for your consideration. The new Duchess paused on the landing, looking back at the assembled staff, who still stood watching her ascent. Please inform them they may resume their duties. I have no desire to disrupt the household's rhythm on my first day. Mrs. Winters's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and turned to dismiss the staff with a sharp gesture. As they dispersed, the Duchess continued to follow her guide through the maze-like corridors of Ironvale House. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to track the veiled figure as she passed. His Grace has ordered a new wardrobe for you, Mrs. Winters said as they approached a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. The modiste will attend you tomorrow for final fittings. Until then, I have taken the liberty of having your existing garments pressed and arranged. The slight hesitation before existing garments spoke volumes about the housekeeper's assessment of the new Duchess's modest trousseau. The veiled figure merely inclined her head in acknowledgement as Mrs. Winters opened the doors to reveal a suite decorated in shades of midnight blue and silver. "This will be most suitable, thank you," the Duchess said, moving to the window that overlooked the rain-soaked gardens below. A flash of lightning illuminated the grounds momentarily, revealing a maze of precisely trimmed hedges and stone statuary. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Mrs. Winters asked, hovering near the doorway. The veiled figure turned from the window. "Only one question, if I may. How long have you served the Duke?" "Since his birth, Your Grace. I was his nurse before becoming housekeeper. Then you know him better than most, I imagine." Mrs. Winters's face remained impassive. "It is not my place to claim such knowledge, Your Grace." "Of course, forgive my presumption." The Duchess moved to the writing desk, running a gloved finger along its polished surface. "That will be all for now, Mrs. Winters. Thank you." Left alone in her new chambers, the Duchess of Blackmore finally raised her hands to the veil that had concealed her face throughout this momentous day. With deliberate slowness, she lifted it, revealing her features to the empty room and the storm-darkened skies beyond the window. The Duchess's first week at Ironvale House passed in a curious solitude, despite the constant presence of servants. She took her meals alone in her chambers, the Duke having retreated to his country estate on urgent business the morning after their wedding. Only a terse note informed her of his departure and the expected date of his return, the evening of the ball that would introduce her to society as the Duchess of Blackmore. In his absence, Sirene found herself at liberty to explore the vast house, always veiled when in the presence of others as he had commanded. The servants watched her with wary curiosity as she wandered through galleries filled with ancestral portraits, lingered in the extensive library, or sat in the conservatory among exotic plants brought back from far-flung corners of the empire. It was in the library that Mrs. Winters found her on the 7th day, seated in a window alcove with a volume of poetry open upon her lap, the veil temporarily raised as she believed herself alone. "Your Grace!" The housekeeper's startled exclamation caused Sirene to quickly lower the veil once more. "Forgive me. I did not mean to intrude." "No intrusion, Mrs. Winters," Sirene replied calmly, though her gloved hands trembled slightly as they smoothed the veil into place. "Did you require me for something?" The older woman hesitated, her eyes fixed upon the place where the veil had been raised moments before. Her curious expression flickered across her features, not the disgust or horror that Sirene had grown accustomed to, but something more complex. "His Grace's carriage has been sighted on the road. He shall arrive within the hour. I thought you might wish to prepare yourself." "Indeed. Thank you for the warning." Sirene closed the book and rose, her silver-grey gown rustling softly. "Has everything been arranged for this evening's ball?" "Yes, Your Grace. The decorations are in place, the orchestra has arrived, and the menu has been approved as His Grace instructed." Mrs. Winters paused, then added with uncharacteristic hesitation, "If I might be so bold, Your Grace, there has been considerable interest in your appearance tonight. The guest list includes the most influential members of the ton." "Including Lady Meryn Draycott, I presume?" Mrs. Winters's lips thinned. "Indeed. Her ladyship was most insistent upon her invitation, despite His Grace having initially struck her name from the list." "How interesting." Sirene moved toward the library door, her steps measured and deliberate. "Please have my bath prepared, and send Jenny to assist with my toilette. I shall wear the gown His Grace selected." As she passed the housekeeper, Sirene felt the woman's gaze follow her, laden with unasked questions. At the threshold, she paused. "Mrs. Winters, you have served the Blackmore family loyally for many years. May I ask you a rather direct question?" "Of course, Your Grace." "Do you believe the Duke married me out of pity, cruelty, or calculation?" The housekeeper's eyes widened at such frankness. After a moment's consideration, she answered with equal directness, "His Grace does nothing without purpose, Your Grace, but I have never known him to act from pity nor from cruelty for its own sake." "Calculation, then?" Sirene nodded slowly. "Thank you for your candor." The distant sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced the Duke's arrival as Sirene returned to her chambers. From her window she observed his tall figure emerge from the carriage, his movements precise and controlled as he ascended the steps without a backward glance. Beside her on the window seat lay a small white heather blossom, the same type she had worn at her wrist during their wedding. She tucked it carefully into her book of poetry before summoning her maid. Hours later, as twilight descended upon London, carriages began arriving at Ironvale House. Lanterns illuminated the drive, casting pools of golden light upon the gravel, where liveried footmen assisted elegantly dressed guests from their conveyances. Inside, the grand ballroom blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, reflected in gilt mirrors and crystal chandeliers. The orchestra tuned their instruments behind a screen of potted palms, while servants circulated with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. In her chambers, Sirene stood motionless as Jenny secured the last pearl button of her gown, a creation of midnight blue silk with silver embroidery that caught the light with each movement. The bodice was modestly cut, but expertly tailored, to hint at a graceful figure beneath. Around her throat hung a single strand of black pearls, the Duke's wedding gift that had arrived that afternoon without a note. "You look beautiful, Your Grace," Jenny whispered, her young face earnest in the mirror's reflection. "A pity none shall see," Sirene replied without bitterness, reaching for the silver-grey veil that lay ready upon the dressing table. "But I thank you for your kind words, Jenny." A firm knock at the door announced the Duke's arrival. Jenny hastily secured the veil in place with pearl-tipped pins before curtsying deeply and scurrying from the room. The Duke entered without waiting for permission, resplendent in formal evening attire, his cravat secured with a black diamond pin that matched the ring he had placed upon Sirene's finger a week prior. "Good evening, Your Grace," Sirene said, dropping into a graceful curtsy. "I trust your business in the country concluded satisfactorily?" It did. His gaze swept over her veiled figure, assessing rather than admiring. "The gown is suitable. You have followed my instructions regarding the veil. To the letter. It has not been raised in the presence of others." Something in her tone caused his eyes to narrow. "You find my conditions objectionable?" "I find them curious, given that you yourself have yet to see what lies beneath." She kept her voice level, neither challenging nor submissive. "One might wonder what purpose is served by concealing what you have not yourself witnessed." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Our guests await. We shall discuss this matter at a more appropriate time." He offered his arm with formal correctness. "Are you prepared to face the ton, Duchess? I have faced worse than idle gossip and cruel speculation, Your Grace." Sirene placed her gloved hand lightly upon his arm. "The question is whether the ton is prepared to face us." For the briefest moment, something like surprise flickered in the Duke's pale eyes. Then his expression resumed its customary impassivity as he escorted her from the chamber toward the grand staircase, where they would make their entrance to the waiting assembly below. At the top of the stairs they paused. The butler's voice rang out, silencing the buzz of conversation in the ballroom. "His Grace, the Duke of Blackmore, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackmore." All eyes turned upward. Gasps and whispers immediately erupted as the veiled Duchess came into view. Lady Merrin's voice carried clearly in the momentary hush. "Good heavens, he actually keeps her hidden like a shameful secret. How perfectly Gothic." The Duke and Duchess descended the grand staircase with measured steps, her hand resting lightly upon his arm. The assembled guests parted before them like the Red Sea before Moses, a wave of whispers following in their wake. The orchestra, sensing the moment, began a stately minuet that no one moved to dance. "Your Grace," Lord Pembroke bowed deeply as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "What a pleasure to see you return to society, and with your bride." His eyes lingered on the veiled figure with undisguised curiosity. "Pembroke." The Duke's acknowledgement was curt, bordering on dismissive. "I trust you recall my instructions regarding tonight's investments?" "Of course, Your Grace. All has been arranged as you directed." "Very good." With that, the Duke guided his wife past the startled lord, effectively ending the conversation before it had properly begun. They moved through the ballroom like royalty through a court of lesser beings, the Duke nodding occasionally to select individuals, while ignoring others entirely. Beside him, the Duchess maintained perfect composure, her veiled head held high, despite the scrutiny that followed her every movement. "Does she speak, I wonder, or merely follow where she is led?" The whispered question from Lady Merrin to her companion carried in a momentary lull of the music. The Duke stiffened, but before he could respond, the Duchess turned toward the speaker. "I assure you, Lady Merrin, I am quite capable of speech when the occasion warrants. I simply find that listening often yields greater wisdom than constant prattle." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. Lady Merrin's face flushed crimson beneath her rouge. "How dare you address me in such a manner? Blackmore, your wife requires instruction in proper etiquette." The Duke's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "On the contrary, Lady Merrin, my wife has merely responded to an insult with admirable restraint. Were I to respond to your impudence, I assure you my words would prove far less gentle." Lady Merrin's companion tugged urgently at her sleeve, whispering something that caused her to retreat with a final venomous glare. The surrounding guests suddenly found great interest in their champagne glasses or the ceiling's architectural details, anywhere but the Duke's cold stare. "You defend me," the Duchess observed quietly, as they continued their circuit of the room. "How unexpected." "You are my wife," he replied, as though this explained everything. "Your honor is mine." "Is that all there is to it? A matter of property and possession?" Before he could answer, they were intercepted by the elderly Dowager Countess of Blackwood, who planted herself directly in their path, with the confidence of one who had seen too many seasons to fear social missteps. "Blackmore," she said, tapping her cane once upon the marble floor, "you've kept your bride hidden long enough. Introduce us properly." The Duke inclined his head with more respect than he had shown any other guest. "Countess, may I present my wife, Sirene, Duchess of Blackmore. My dear, the Dowager Countess of Blackwood, my godmother." "Your Grace." Sirene curtsied gracefully. The Dowager studied the veiled figure with sharp eyes. "Well, at least she has proper posture. Come, child, walk with me. I wish to speak with you without this wolf of a godson hovering." For a moment, the Duke appeared ready to object, but the Dowager's expression brooked no argument. With visible reluctance, he released his wife's arm. "I shall await you by the terrace doors, Duchess." As he strode away, the Dowager guided Sirene toward a quiet alcove, partially screened by potted palms. "Now then," she said, settling onto a small settee and gesturing for Sirene to join her. "Tell me how you come to be married to the most disagreeable man in London." "I find him less disagreeable than most, Your Grace," Sirene replied diplomatically. The Dowager snorted. "Diplomatic, aren't you? I shall be blunt then. The Ton says he married you out of perversity to shock society. Others claim he needed a wife who would not interfere with his private pursuits. And what do you believe, Your Grace?" "I believe Raelian Vale does nothing without purpose." The Dowager leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I also believe there is more to you than meets the eye, or rather more than the eye is permitted to meet. That veil intrigues me. His Grace prefers I remain veiled in public. His Grace prefers control in all things." The Dowager's shrewd gaze seemed to penetrate the veil between them. "Yet here you stand, married to the most feared man in England. Either you are a victim or a strategist of considerable skill. Perhaps I'm simply a woman who recognized a mutually beneficial arrangement when it was offered." The Dowager's wrinkled face split into a delighted grin. "Oh, I do like you. You're wasted on him, you know. You should have married my grandson." "Is your grandson the most feared duke in England?" "No, merely the most dissolute viscount in Yorkshire," the Dowager replied with a cackle, "but considerably more charming." "I find I have little use for charm, Your Grace. It rarely lasts beyond the first frost." The Dowager's laughter drew curious glances from nearby guests. "Well said, child. Now tell me—" She broke off as the music suddenly ceased, and a commotion arose near the ballroom's entrance. "What now?" A footman hurried to the Duke, who still stood by the terrace doors, and whispered urgently in his ear. The Duke's expression darkened as he strode purposefully toward the entrance hall, his bearing rigid with controlled anger. "It appears something unexpected has occurred," Sirene observed, rising from the settee. "In my experience, unexpected rarely means pleasant," the Dowager replied, using her cane to lever herself upright. "Let us investigate before the gossips twist the tale beyond recognition." They made their way toward the entrance hall, where a growing crowd had gathered. Through a gap in the throng, Sirene glimpsed her husband confronting a disheveled man whose once fine clothing bore the stains of travel and hard living. "You were not invited, sir," the Duke's voice cut like a blade. "Remove yourself before I have you thrown out." "Is that any way to greet your brother-in-law, Your Grace?" The man's voice carried a slurred edge that suggested he had fortified himself with spirits before this confrontation. "Especially when I've come such a long way to meet your mysterious bride." A murmur rippled through the assembled guests. Sirene felt her heart contract painfully within her chest. The man swayed slightly on his feet, his unsteady gaze sweeping the crowd until it found her veiled figure. "There she is," he pointed a trembling finger. "My little sister, hidden away like damaged goods." He lunged forward suddenly, surprisingly quick despite his inebriated state. "Let's show these fine folk what the mighty Duke of Blackmore has taken to wife, shall we?" Before anyone could react, he reached for Seren's veil. The Duke moved with astonishing speed, seizing the man's wrist in an iron grip mere inches from the silver-grey fabric. "Touch her," the Duke said, his voice deadly quiet, "and it will be the last act of your miserable life." The entrance hall fell silent as the guests watched the tableau before them, the Duke gripping the intruder's wrist with such force that the man's fingers had begun to whiten, the veiled Duchess standing perfectly still, the Dowager Countess observing with narrowed eyes. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then the intruder laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Such chivalry, Your Grace. One might almost believe you married my sister for love, rather than other considerations." The Duke's grip tightened further, causing the man to wince. "Mr. Halwyn, you forget yourself. You are trespassing in my home and insulting my wife. Either of these alone would justify having you removed. Together they test the limits of my forbearance." "Tobias." The Duchess's voice emerged from behind her veil, soft yet carrying clearly in the hushed hall. "You are unwell. This is neither the time nor the place for a reunion." The man, Tobias Halwyn, attempted a mocking bow despite the Duke's iron hold. "Unwell, is that what we're calling it now, sister? Not disgraced, not disinherited, merely unwell. Gentlemen." The Dowager Countess rapped her cane sharply against the marble floor. "This spectacle has entertained the gossips quite sufficiently. Blackmore, I suggest you continue this discussion in your study, away from these vultures." The Duke released Tobias's wrist with a slight shove that caused the inebriated man to stagger. "Indeed, Countess." His gaze swept over the assembled guests with glacial contempt. "The orchestra will resume. Anyone remaining in this hall when the next measure begins will no longer be welcome in my home." The crowd dispersed with remarkable alacrity, though many cast lingering glances over their shoulders as they retreated toward the ballroom. The music swelled again, deliberately loud and cheerful, as though to drown any further disturbance. "Winters," the Duke addressed his housekeeper, who had materialized at his elbow. "Escort Mr. Halwyn to my study. Ensure he remains there until I arrive." "Yes, Your Grace." Mrs. Winters gestured for 2 footmen to flank Tobias, who allowed himself to be led away with surprising docility, his momentary fire seemingly extinguished. When they had gone, the Duke turned to his wife. "You did not inform me you had a brother. You did not ask about my family, Your Grace." Her voice remained even, betraying nothing of her emotions behind the concealing veil. "In truth, Tobias and I have been estranged since our father's death 3 years ago. I did not expect to see him again. Yet here he is, disrupting my ball and making accusations of what, precisely?" The Duke's eyes had grown cold again, calculating. "What other considerations might he believe motivated our marriage?" The Dowager Countess cleared her throat pointedly. "I believe I shall return to the ballroom and quell any unseemly speculation. Blackmore, do try to remember that, however justified your anger, this is your wife's brother." With that parting admonition she departed, her cane tapping a steady rhythm against the floor. Left alone in the entrance hall, the Duke and Duchess regarded one another in silence for several heartbeats. Finally, Seren spoke. "My brother was once a promising scholar, following in our father's footsteps. After father's disgrace and death, Tobias turned to drink and gambling to escape his grief. I have not seen him in nearly 2 years, though I received occasional letters demanding money I did not possess." "And how did he discover our marriage?" "I took pains to keep the announcement discreet. The tongue's whispers travel far and wide, Your Grace, particularly when they concern a scandal as delicious as the most feared duke in England marrying a disfigured nobody." The Duke flinched almost imperceptibly at her frank assessment. "You should return to the ballroom. Our absence together will only fuel speculation. And will you join me, or are you going to confront my brother alone?" "This is a family matter requiring privacy." "Indeed it is," Seren agreed. "My family. I should be present." For a moment, the Duke appeared taken aback by her assertiveness, his brow furrowed as he studied her veiled face. "Very well, but you will allow me to handle any negotiations that may be required." "Negotiations?" A new edge entered her voice. "Is that what you anticipate? That my brother has come to extract payment? Men like your brother rarely appear unexpectedly without some financial motivation." The Duke offered his arm with formal correctness. "Shall we proceed? I dislike keeping vermin waiting longer than necessary." Seren placed her hand upon his arm, her touch light but firm. "He is still my brother, Your Grace. whatever his faults. The Duke led her through the house toward his study, their progress noted by servants who quickly averted their eyes, and guests who whispered behind fans and gloved hands. The music from the ballroom faded as they moved deeper into the house, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps upon the polished floors. Outside the study door, the Duke paused. "I must ask what he meant by damaged goods. Is there some aspect of your situation that you neglected to disclose before our marriage?" "No, Your Grace." Her voice carried a hint of weariness. "My brother refers to the same disfigurement that prompted you to keep me veiled. I have hidden nothing from you, though the reverse cannot be said." Before the Duke could respond to this subtle accusation, he pushed open the study door. Within, Tobias Halwyn stood examining a crystal decanter of brandy, though apparently he had not yet partaken. Mrs. Winters sat rigidly in a chair near the door, her disapproving gaze fixed upon the visitor. "You may go, Mrs. Winters," the Duke said. "Close the door behind you." When the housekeeper had departed, Tobias turned to face them, his bloodshot eyes moving from the Duke to the veiled figure of his sister. What a charming domestic scene! The feared Duke and his hidden bride. "Tell me, Seren, does he permit you to remove that veil even in private? Or has he convinced you that your face is too monstrous for daylight?" "That is enough," the Duke said, his voice dangerously soft. "State your business, Mr. Halwyn, then leave. My patience wears thin." Tobias smiled, revealing teeth stained by tobacco. "My business? Simply to see my dear sister, of course, to ensure her welfare in this unusual marriage." "How touching," the Duke replied coldly, "particularly given that you made no effort to ensure her welfare during the 2 years preceding our marriage, when she lived in poverty, after your gambling debts claimed what remained of your father's estate." Tobias's smile faltered. "You seem remarkably well informed about our family affairs, Your Grace. I make it my business to be informed about matters that concern me." The Duke moved to stand behind his desk, a position of authority. "Now I will ask once more, what do you want? Perhaps I merely wish to understand why the most powerful duke in England would marry a penniless, disfigured scholar's daughter." Tobias's gaze slid to his sister. "Unless there are compelling reasons beyond the obvious." Serene stepped forward, her posture rigid with suppressed emotion. "If you are implying what I think, Tobias, you dishonor both yourself and me. The Duke married me of his own free will, for reasons that need not concern you." "Of his own free will?" Tobias gave a harsh laugh. "Just as father died of his own free will, just as our family name was destroyed of its own accord." The Duke's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself, sir." "Ask your wife," Tobias spat. "Ask her about the scholar's daughter who destroyed her father with an accusation that could never be proven. Ask her about the night of the fire that claimed not only our family home, but also her once celebrated beauty." The study seemed to grow colder as Tobias's words hung in the air. The Duke's gaze shifted to his veiled wife, who stood motionless, her hands clasped tightly before her. "I see my sister has been selective in what she has shared with you, Your Grace." Tobias moved toward the brandy decanter, helping himself to a generous pour without requesting permission. "Our father was ruined not by academic rivals, as she may have claimed, but by his own daughter's testimony." "You speak of matters you do not understand." Seren's voice emerged with surprising steadiness. "And you dishonor father's memory with these half-truths." "Half-truths?" Tobias downed the brandy in a single swallow, then slammed the crystal glass upon the desk. "Tell him then. Tell your husband how you testified against our father before the university board. Tell him how you claimed impropriety where there was only scholarship." The Duke raised a hand, silencing further outburst. "Whatever grievances lie between you and your sister, they do not justify your intrusion into my home or your disruption of my ball. If you have come seeking financial assistance, name your price for your permanent departure from England. I will consider it." Tobias's bloodshot eyes widened, then narrowed calculatingly. "How generous, Your Grace, and how eager you seem to be rid of your bride's only living relative. One might almost suspect you fear what family secrets I might reveal." "I fear nothing from you," the Duke replied with deadly calm, "but I do grow weary of your insinuations. Name your price or leave empty-handed. £5,000 would ease my journey considerably. An absurd sum for so little value." The Duke moved to a writing desk in the corner, withdrew a sheet of paper and began to write. "I will give you £1,000, payable through my solicitor in monthly installments of £50, contingent upon your residence remaining at least 100 miles from London." He signed the document with a flourish, then sprinkled sand over the wet ink. "Additionally, you will sign a document renouncing any future claims upon me or the Duchess." Tobias's face flushed with anger. You insult me, sir. I am a gentleman by birth, not some beggar to be dismissed with crumbs from your table. A gentleman? The Duke's voice could have frozen flame. A gentleman does not attempt to extort money by threatening his sister's reputation. A gentleman does not appear inebriated at a private function to which he was not invited. You, sir, are many things, but a gentleman is not among them. Throughout this exchange, Seren had remained silent, her veiled face turned slightly toward the window where rain had begun to patter against the glass. Now she moved forward, placing herself between her brother and her husband. "Tobias," she said softly, "what happened to you? Where is the brother who once read me poetry by candlelight when I was ill? Who defended my honor when father's students made improper advances?" For a moment, something like shame flickered across Tobias's ravaged features. "That brother died in the same fire that claimed your face, sister. He burned alongside father's reputation and our family's good name." "No," she shook her head slowly. "He began to die long before when he chose resentment over truth and drink over responsibility." She turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, might I have a moment alone with my brother?" The Duke's expression darkened. "I think not. Please," she said, laying a gloved hand lightly upon his arm. "Just 5 minutes. Then I will not oppose whatever arrangement you deem appropriate." After a moment's consideration, the Duke inclined his head slightly. 5 minutes. I shall wait outside." As he passed Tobias, he added in a voice like steel wrapped in silk, "If you distress her in any way, your passage from England will be considerably less comfortable than we have discussed." When the door closed behind the Duke, Seren reached up and slowly lifted her veil, revealing her face to her brother for the first time in years. Tobias inhaled sharply, his eyes widening as they traced the silvery scar that ran from her temple across her cheek to the corner of her mouth, pulling it slightly askew. "It healed better than the doctors expected," she said quietly, "though I believe that Tun's imagination has conjured something far more grotesque." Tobias looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Why did you marry him, Seren? A man with his reputation. There must have been other options." "What options, Tobias? After you gambled away what remained of our inheritance, after every respectable household in London closed its doors to Professor Halwyn's disgraced daughter." She moved to the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. "The Duke offered protection and a position that shields me from society's cruelest barbs. In return, I provide him with a wife who makes no emotional demands and asks no uncomfortable questions about his business affairs." "A business arrangement, then?" Tobias laughed bitterly. "How practical you've become, sister. And does this arrangement include sharing his bed? Or is that where he draws the line with his damaged purchase?" Seren turned, her scarred face composed, despite the cutting words. "You have no right to speak of my marriage, not after you abandoned me to destitution without a backward glance." "I was drowning in my own grief." Tobias's voice rose, then broke. "Father was destroyed, our home was ashes, and you were the instrument of it all." "I spoke the truth," she said simply. "Would you have preferred I remain silent while he pursued his research with other vulnerable young women? While he used his position to coerce and manipulate? His methods were unorthodox, but his intentions do not excuse his actions. I loved him, Tobias. He was my father too. But what he did was wrong, and my silence would have made me complicit." She moved closer to her brother, close enough that he could not avoid seeing the permanent mark that fire had left upon her once flawless face. "I have made my peace with my choices." "Have you?" Before he could answer, a firm knock announced the Duke's return. Seren quickly lowered her veil into place as the door opened. The Duke entered, his sharp gaze taking in the scene before him. The veiled Duchess by the window, her brother standing with shoulders slumped in uncharacteristic defeat. "Your time has elapsed," the Duke said. "Have you reached an understanding?" Tobias straightened, composing his features into a mask of dignity despite his disheveled appearance. "I believe we have, Your Grace. I will accept your terms, with one amendment." "You are hardly in a position to negotiate, Mr. Halwyn." "Not for myself," Tobias clarified hastily. "For Seren. I ask only that you permit her to write to me occasionally, to know that she is well treated. In return, I give my word that I shall never again enter your home uninvited or speak of family matters to others." The Duke considered this for a moment, then looked to his wife. "The Duchess is at liberty to correspond with whomever she wishes, provided such correspondence does not interfere with her duties or bring disrepute to my name." "Thank you, Your Grace." Serene's voice betrayed a hint of surprise at this unexpected concession. "Very well." The Duke moved to his desk and made a notation on the document he had prepared earlier. "Sign here, Mr. Halwyn. My man will see you out and provide sufficient funds for immediate travel expenses. The first installment will be available through my solicitor in 1 month, contingent upon your departure from London. Tobias took the quill, hesitating only briefly before signing his name with a flourish that echoed his former elegance. "Seren," he said, turning to his sister, I wish you happiness, improbable as that may seem in your current circumstances. "Take care of yourself, Tobias," she replied softly. "Perhaps one day you will find your way back to the brother I once knew." After Tobias had been escorted from the room, the Duke and Duchess stood in silence for several moments. The distant strains of the orchestra reminded them of the ball continuing without their presence, of the guests undoubtedly speculating about the unexpected drama that had unfolded. "We should return," the Duke finally said. "Our absence has already provided ample fodder for gossip." "Yes," Seren agreed, adjusting her veil to ensure it hung properly, "though I doubt our presence will quell the whispers at this point." "Let them whisper." The Duke offered his arm with formal correctness. "The Ton's opinion matters little to me." As they walked toward the ballroom, Seren spoke without looking at him. "You have questions about what my brother said, about my father and the fire." "Many," the Duke acknowledged, "but they can wait until we have fulfilled our social obligations. Tonight we present a united front to society. Tomorrow, perhaps, we may speak of truth between ourselves." They paused at the entrance to the ballroom, the glow of candlelight and the swell of music washing over them. The Duchess placed her hand lightly upon the Duke's arm, and together they stepped forward to face the curious stares and whispered speculation of London society. The remainder of the ball passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful conversation. The Duke and Duchess maintained an impeccable facade of unity, though keen observers might have noted the slight distance between them as they moved among their guests. By midnight, when the last carriage had departed down the lamplit drive, both were weary from the strain of social performance. "You should rest," the Duke said, as they stood in the now empty ballroom, servants already beginning the process of returning the house to order. "It has been an, eventful evening, indeed." Serene's hands fidgeted slightly with the edge of her veil. "Though I find I am rather too alert for sleep at present, perhaps some air might be beneficial." The Duke hesitated, then gestured toward the terrace doors. "The rain has ceased. A brief turn about the gardens would not be inappropriate if you wish for company." They walked in silence through the formal gardens, gravel crunching beneath their feet, the night air cool and damp with lingering moisture. Gas lamps along the paths cast pools of golden light, while shadows gathered beneath the carefully trimmed hedges and statuary. The scent of wet roses hung heavy in the air. When they reached a small stone pavilion at the garden's center, the Duke paused. "Your brother's appearance was unexpected. I apologize for any distress it may have caused you." "You need not apologize for Tobias's actions. They are his responsibility alone." Seren moved to the pavilion's edge, looking out across the moonlit garden. "Though I confess I am curious about your involvement in his departure, the terms seemed most efficiently arranged. I have found that clear financial incentives generally prove effective in such situations." The Duke remained standing at the pavilion's entrance, his posture rigidly correct. "Your brother struck me as a man who would respond predictably to monetary motivation. You have encountered similar situations before?" "Occasionally, though usually the importunate relatives appear after the marriage has been established, not during the introductory ball." A note of dry humor colored his voice, surprising her. "I should have warned you of his existence at least." She turned to face him, the veil stirring slightly in the night breeze. "Though in truth I believed him to be in Edinburgh, possibly even abroad. We have not communicated since before my employment as a governess." The Duke stepped into the pavilion, his expression thoughtful in the dim light. "Your brother mentioned several matters that require clarification if we are to proceed with our arrangement in good faith. You refer to my father's disgrace." It was not a question. "Among other things. I was aware of Professor Halwyn's fall from academic grace, of course, though the particulars were kept remarkably quiet." "Your brother implied your direct involvement." Serene's hands clasped tightly before her. "Would you have me remove the veil for this conversation, Your Grace? It seems only fitting you should see my face as I explain how it came to be marked." The Duke considered her request, his pale eyes studying the veiled figure before him with an intensity she could feel even through the concealing fabric. "If you wish it." With deliberate movements, Seren reached up and unpinned the veil, folding it carefully before setting it upon the stone bench. The moonlight and gas lamps illuminated her revealed face, heart-shaped, with delicate features marred by a silvery scar that ran from her right temple across her cheek to the corner of her mouth, pulling it slightly askew. The Duke's expression remained carefully neutral as he took in her appearance. "The Ton's speculation has indeed been greatly exaggerated. Your injury, while noticeable, hardly justifies the ghoulish descriptions circulating through London drawing rooms. Disappointingly mundane, I fear. No monstrous disfigurement, merely the mark of survival. Her tone was light, though her eyes watched him carefully. How did it happen? Seren turned away slightly, her profile outlined against the night sky. My father was Professor Aldrich Halwyn, once acclaimed as the foremost authority on ancient religious practices. His research into certain pagan rituals had earned him both accolades and whispered concern over the years. She paused, collecting her thoughts. 3 years ago, I discovered that he had been using his position to experiment with young women. Students, housemaids, even daughters of colleagues. Rituals that cross the boundaries of propriety and consent. When I confronted him, he dismissed my concerns as feminine hysteria, insisting that his academic pursuit justified any means necessary. And so you reported him to the university board. The Duke's voice was neutral, revealing nothing of his thoughts. I did. I had evidence, his journals, testimony from 2 victims who dared to speak. The board acted quickly but quietly. His position was terminated, his pension revoked. He was asked to leave university housing immediately. Her fingers unconsciously traced the line of her scar. That night, he burned his papers in the library fireplace. The flames caught the curtains, then the bookshelves. Tobias was not at home. I woke to smoke and heat. You attempted to save your father. It was not a question. Seren nodded, her eyes distant with memory. I found him in the library, watching his life's work burn. He seemed peaceful. When I tried to pull him from the room, a burning beam fell. This, she gestured to her scarred face, was the result. He died that night from smoke inhalation. I survived, though the doctors were uncertain for some time. The Duke moved closer, studying her face with clinical detachment. And your brother blames you for both your father's disgrace and death. Tobias idolized our father. He could not, cannot, accept that the man who taught him philosophy and poetry could also be capable of such darkness. It is easier to blame me than to reconcile these contradictions. Yet you bear this burden alone. The Duke's voice held a new note, something almost like respect. Some burdens cannot be shared, Your Grace. Seren met his gaze directly, her green-grey eyes clear and unflinching. Just as I suspect you carry your own solitary weights. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken understanding. The night breeze stirred the rose bushes, releasing their fragrance into the air. Your face is not what I expected, the Duke finally said. No? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. What did you expect, Your Grace? Something more dramatic, I suppose. The scar is noticeable, certainly, but hardly the grotesque disfigurement society has painted. In fact, he paused, seeming to choose his words with unusual care. In the proper light, it might even be considered distinctive. Seren blinked, surprise momentarily disrupting her composed facade. That is perhaps the most peculiar compliment I have ever received, Your Grace. It was not intended as a compliment, merely an observation. Yet something in his tone belied the clinical nature of his words. He turned abruptly, moving to the pavilion's entrance. It grows late. We should return to the house. Seren reached for her veil, then hesitated. Would you prefer I replace this for our walk back, Your Grace? The Duke considered for a moment. The hour is late. The servants will be occupied with their duties. If you find it more comfortable without, there seems little purpose in donning it merely for the journey to your chambers. They walked in silence through the moonlit gardens, the Duke matching his pace to hers. As they neared the terrace doors, Seren spoke without turning. Might I ask a question of my own, Your Grace? You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. Fair enough. She paused at the bottom of the terrace steps. Why did you agree to marry me? You knew of my father's disgrace, my supposed disfigurement, my lack of fortune or connections. What possible advantage could such a match bring to a man in your position? The Duke was silent for so long that she thought he had chosen to invoke his right not to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, revealing nothing of his inner thoughts. Advantage comes in many forms, Duchess, not all of them obvious to society's understanding. He offered his arm with formal correctness, but the hour grows late for such philosophical discussions. We shall continue this conversation tomorrow if you wish. As they entered the darkened house, a footman materialized to light their way upstairs. The Duke escorted Seren to the door of her chambers, where he paused regarding her unveiled face in the flickering candlelight. One observation, if I may, he said, his voice low enough that the distant footman could not hear. Of course, Your Grace. You need not fear society's reaction to your appearance. The scar they imagine is far worse than the reality before me. His eyes met hers directly. Good night, Duchess. Good night, Your Grace. She watched as he turned and strode away down the corridor, his bearing as rigid and controlled as ever, yet somehow changed in a way she could not quite define. The morning after the ball dawned bright and clear, as though nature sought to compensate for the previous evening's tensions. Seren stood at her chamber window, watching servants tidy the gardens below, the sun glinting off dew-damp gravel paths. Without the veil, the world seemed sharper, colours more vibrant, an irony not lost on her as she contemplated the night's revelations. A gentle knock at her door preceded Jenny's entrance with a breakfast tray. The young maid started visibly at the sight of her mistress's unveiled face, then immediately lowered her eyes in embarrassment. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I didn't expect... That is, I thought... It's quite all right, Jenny." Seren turned fully to face her, determined not to hide within her own chambers. "I imagine the reality is somewhat less dramatic than the servants' hall speculations." Jenny blushed to the roots of her hair as she set down the tray. "We would never presume to speculate, Your Grace." "Of course not," Seren replied with gentle amusement. "Just as I would never presume that natural human curiosity ceases upon entering service. Tell me, does the household find me a disappointment? I fear my modest disfigurement hardly lives up to the monstrous countenance they may have imagined." Jenny's eyes widened at such directness. "No one is disappointed, Your Grace. In fact..." She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "Mrs. Winters said just this morning that you were quite lovely, scar or no, and that His Grace had done better than he deserved." Seren laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Mrs. Winters is more generous than diplomatic, it seems. Please thank her for the compliment, though perhaps not the assessment of His Grace." As Jenny busied herself arranging the breakfast dishes, Seren spotted a sealed note upon the tray. "What is this?" "His Grace sent it up with instructions that it be delivered with your morning tea, Your Grace." Jenny curtsied. "Will there be anything else?" "No, thank you. You may go." When the door closed behind the maid, Seren broke the black wax seal bearing the Blackmore crest. The note, written in the Duke's precise hand, was brief and to the point. "Duchess, I shall be engaged with business matters until noon. At 1 o'clock I request your company in the library to continue our discussion. Until then the house and grounds are at your disposal. You may maintain or dispense with the veil as you see fit. Blackmore." Seren read the note twice, her fingertips tracing the firm strokes of his signature. Such a simple thing, the freedom to choose whether to conceal her face, yet it represented a shift in their arrangement that she had not anticipated. She placed the note carefully on her writing desk before turning her attention to breakfast, her appetite surprisingly robust after the emotional tumult of the previous evening. Later that morning, she ventured into the main areas of the house without her veil for the first time. The servants' reactions ranged from poorly concealed shock to determined indifference, though none dared comment directly. In the morning room, she encountered the Dowager Countess, who had apparently stayed the night rather than returning to her own residence. "Well, well," the elderly woman said, lowering her newspaper. "So, the mysterious Duchess finally emerges from behind her shroud. Come closer, child. Let me see what has caused such absurd speculation." Serene approached, allowing the Dowager to examine her scarred face without comment. After a moment's scrutiny, the old woman snorted dismissively. "Is that all? Good heavens, the ton will be terribly disappointed. They've been imagining everything from a missing eye to scales like a serpent. How perfectly ordinary you are." "You find a facial scar ordinary, Your Grace?" Seren asked, amused by the Countess's bluntness. "At my age, child, one has seen far worse. My late husband returned from the Crimea with half his face reconstructed and still managed to cut a fine figure in society." The Dowager gestured for Seren to sit beside her. "No, what interests me far more than your modest scar is the effect you appear to have on my godson." "Effect? I'm afraid I don't understand your meaning." "Don't you?" The Dowager's shrewd eyes studied her with unnerving intensity. "Raelian Vale has spent the past decade cultivating a reputation for ruthless detachment. He has systematically dismantled his enemies in Parliament and ruined those who dared cross him in business. The Ton fears him, with good reason. Yet last night he defended you publicly against Lady Merrin, permitted you to speak with me privately despite his obvious misgivings, and handled your disreputable brother with remarkable restraint. He was protecting his property and reputation," Seren suggested, though without conviction. "Nonsense, he could have accomplished that far more efficiently by simply having your brother thrown out by the footman. Instead he negotiated, considered your wishes, and even permitted continued correspondence." The Dowager tapped her cane emphatically. "Most telling of all, he has apparently given you leave to dispense with that ridiculous veil." Seren smoothed her skirts, uncomfortable under such scrutiny. You ascribe emotional motivations where practical considerations suffice, Your Grace. Do I? Then tell me, what practical purpose is served by displaying your scar to the household? What advantage does Blackmore gain by risking society's gossip about his damaged bride? Before Seren could formulate a response, the library door opened across the hall, and the Duke himself emerged in conversation with a severe-looking gentleman carrying a leather portfolio. Both men paused upon seeing the women in the morning room. Godmother, Duchess. The Duke inclined his head formally. I trust you rested well after last night's events. Well enough, though these old bones don't appreciate unfamiliar mattresses, the Dowager replied tartly. Your wife has been keeping me company now that she's abandoned that absurd veil. The Duke's gaze moved to Seren's face, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Indeed, a sensible decision given the circumstances. The gentleman beside him cleared his throat discreetly. Your Grace, if I might suggest we conclude our business, the documents require immediate attention if they are to be dispatched by today's post. Of course, Farnsworth. Ladies, if you'll excuse us. With a slight bow, the Duke retreated into the library, his solicitor following closely behind. Fascinating, the Dowager murmured once the door had closed. Not a flicker of surprise, which means he expected you to heed his permission to dispense with the veil. More interesting still, he made no attempt to explain your unveiled state to Farnsworth, who will undoubtedly share his observations with certain interested parties. Perhaps His Grace simply does not concern himself with others' opinions, Seren suggested. Oh, he concerns himself with everything that might affect his interests, child. Every word, every action is calculated. The Dowager rose, leaning heavily on her cane. The question you should be asking is not why he married you despite your supposed disfigurement, but why he perpetuated the belief that you required concealment in the first place. With that cryptic observation, the Dowager departed to her guest chamber, leaving Seren to contemplate their conversation in solitude. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 12, reminding her that in just 1 hour she would meet with the Duke to continue their discussion from the previous night. What revelations that conversation might bring she could not begin to guess. At precisely 1 o'clock, Seren presented herself at the library door, having chosen a gown of deep blue that complemented her coloring without drawing attention to her scar. She knocked once, then entered at the Duke's bidding. He stood by the window, framed by sunlight that turned his severe black attire to stark silhouette. The solicitor had departed, leaving the library in perfect order, leather-bound volumes lining the walls from floor to ceiling, the scent of beeswax polish and old paper hanging in the air. Duchess! He turned to face her, his expression as controlled as ever. I see you've chosen to continue without the veil. You gave me leave to decide for myself, Your Grace. I find clarity preferable to concealment, at least in private conversation. She moved further into the room, stopping several paces from him. I believe we were to continue our discussion from last night. Indeed. The Duke gestured to a pair of leather armchairs positioned near the fireplace, where a small fire burned despite the warmth of the day. Please be seated. Would you care for tea? No, thank you. Seren took the offered chair, arranging her skirts with deliberate calm. I find myself more interested in answers than refreshment at present. A flicker of something that might almost have been amusement crossed the Duke's face as he took the seat opposite hers. Very well. Where shall we begin? Perhaps with my question from last night, Seren suggested. Why did you agree to marry me? The truth, if you please, not philosophical deflections. The truth. The Duke studied her for a moment, his pale eyes unnervingly direct. The truth is multifaceted, Duchess. I required a wife for practical reasons, to secure my lineage, to manage my household, to present a respectable facade to society. But I had no desire for the complications of emotion or the distractions of beauty. So you deliberately sought a wife you believed would be unattractive. Seren's voice remained steady, though her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I sought a wife whose appearance would discourage the ton's matchmaking mamas from questioning my choice. Yes, a wife whose supposed disfigurement would explain my desire to keep her secluded, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. A wife whose gratitude for rescue from dire circumstances might ensure her cooperation with my requirements. The brutal honesty of his assessment hung in the air between them. Seren absorbed it without visible reaction, though inwardly she felt a curious mix of vindication and disappointment. I see, she said finally. And now that you have discovered my disfigurement to be considerably less dramatic than advertised, do you find our arrangement unsatisfactory? The Duke considered her question with the same methodical attention he might give a complex business proposal. Unsatisfactory? No. Unexpected, certainly. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. You present me with a conundrum, Duchess. The strategic advantage of your supposed disfigurement is diminished by the reality before me. How inconvenient for you, Seren replied dryly. Perhaps I should have warned you that I'm merely scarred, not monstrous, though in my defense, Your Grace, you never actually asked to see my face before our wedding. A tactical error on my part, he acknowledged with surprising candor. I relied on second-hand accounts and reputation, rather than direct verification. The fearsome Duke of Blackmore, misled by gossip. A smile tugged at the corner of Serene's mouth. How the tongue would savor such irony. Indeed. His expression remained serious, though something shifted in his eyes, a glimmer of what might have been reluctant appreciation. However, the situation is not without potential advantage. Your revealed face, while marked, is not displeasing. This offers new strategic possibilities. Strategic possibilities, she echoed. You make marriage sound like warfare, Your Grace. Is it not? Alliances formed and broken, territory claimed and defended, victories celebrated and defeats concealed behind smiling masks. He rose abruptly, moving to pour himself a small measure of brandy from a crystal decanter. Would you care for some sherry? No, thank you. Seren watched him, trying to discern the thoughts behind his impenetrable facade. If my face no longer serves your original purpose, what new strategy do you envision for our arrangement? The Duke returned to his seat, brandy untouched in his hand. I propose a modification to our original terms. Instead of remaining perpetually veiled and secluded, you will gradually emerge into society. The scar will be visible but not emphasized. We will neither confirm nor deny the ton's more lurid speculations about how you acquired it. To what end? Your brother's dramatic appearance last night has already set tongues wagging. Rather than fight the tide of gossip, we shall direct it. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a rare intensity. Those who whispered that I married you out of perversity or peculiar preference will be confounded. Those who claimed I kept you veiled out of shame or disgust will be proven wrong. So instead, London will see that I chose a woman of character and dignity, whose physical imperfection is vastly outweighed by her composure and intelligence. Seren studied him, searching for the hidden purpose behind this unexpected change of course. You speak of presenting me to society as though unveiling a new acquisition, yet I sense there is more to this proposal than merely correcting public misconceptions. Perceptive as always. He set the untouched brandy aside. I have enemies, Duchess, powerful men who would see me ruined if they could, men who have spent years searching for a weakness to exploit in my defenses. And I was to be that weakness, she concluded, the damaged bride, hidden away like a shameful secret, a point of vulnerability. Precisely. By selecting a wife rumored to be hideously disfigured, I expected to present an obvious target, one I could predict and control, but now, he gestured toward her face, the reality offers a different opportunity. Instead of a hidden weakness, you may become an unexpected strength. How flattering! Seren's voice remained level, though a hint of irony colored her words. And what role would you have me play in this new strategy, Your Grace? Silent ornament, gracious hostess, political ally? All of those, potentially. His gaze was calculating yet not unkind. Your father was Professor Halwyn, whose work on ancient rituals and historical governance was required reading at Oxford before his disgrace. You were educated far beyond the typical accomplishments deemed suitable for young ladies. You speak multiple languages, understand political theory, and clearly possess both courage and composure under pressure. These qualities need not be wasted in seclusion. Serene absorbed this assessment in silence, surprised that he had bothered to learn such details about her background. Finally, she asked, and what would I gain from this modification to our arrangement? Beyond the dubious pleasure of facing society's scrutiny directly rather than hiding from it. A more meaningful existence than embroidery and solitude, he replied immediately. Access to my libraries, political salons, correspondence with scholars who might value your insights, a measure of influence in circles that once dismissed you, and, he hesitated, seemingly uncertain for the first time in their conversation, perhaps a marriage that offers more than mere convenience to both parties. The implication hung in the air between them, neither fully articulated nor easily dismissed. Serene found herself unexpectedly affected by the possibility his words suggested, not of love, certainly, but of partnership more substantive than she had dared hope for when accepting his proposal. You speak of a true marriage, she said carefully, not merely the legal fiction we have maintained thus far. I speak of possibility, he corrected. I make no promises beyond what I know I can fulfill, but I believe our arrangement might evolve in ways beneficial to both our interests, including the production of an heir, I presume. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch from the most fundamental expectation of any ducal marriage. Eventually, yes. His voice remained measured, betraying no emotion, but that need not be our immediate concern. Seren rose and moved to the window, needing space to consider his proposal without the intensity of his gaze upon her. Outside, gardeners trimmed the formal hedges with mathematical precision, their methodical work a counterpoint to the tumult of her thoughts. "You have been honest with me, Your Grace, so I shall be equally candid." She turned to face him. "When I accepted your proposal, I expected a marriage in name only, protection and respectability in exchange for managing your household and preserving your solitude. I did not anticipate evolution." "Nor did I," he admitted. "Yet circumstances change. Strategies must adapt." "Indeed." She studied him. This formidable man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his reputation for brilliant calculation. "Before I agree to this modified arrangement, I must know, what precipitated this change in strategy? Was it merely seeing my face and realizing its potential utility, or is there some other factor at play?" The Duke hesitated, and for a moment Seren thought he might evade the question. Instead, he answered with unexpected directness. "Last night, when your brother threatened to expose your past, you did not cower or plead. You stood your ground with quiet dignity. When we spoke in the garden pavilion, you shared painful truths without self-pity. And this morning you chose to face the household unveiled, despite years of hiding behind fabric and shadow." He rose, crossing the room to stand before her. "Courage impresses me, Duchess. It is rarer than beauty, and more valuable than accomplishment." The sincerity in his voice startled her. This was not the calculated flattery of a strategist, but something more genuine, an admission that seemed to surprise even him as the words left his mouth. "I see," she said softly. "Then perhaps we may indeed find a more advantageous arrangement than originally envisioned." "Then you agree to my proposal, with one condition." She held his gaze steadily. "Complete honesty between us in private, at least. No more secrets, no hidden agendas. If we are to present a united front to society, we must know exactly where we stand with each other." The Duke considered this for a long moment. "Honesty is a dangerous commodity, Duchess, even between husband and wife. Nevertheless, it is my condition. Take it or leave our arrangement as it stands." A flicker of something like respect crossed his features. "Very well. Honesty it shall be, though you may come to regret demanding it." "I doubt that, Your Grace. I have lived with secrets and their consequences. I find truth, however painful, preferable to comfortable lies." "Then we are agreed." He extended his hand, a formal gesture sealing their new understanding. Seren placed her gloved hand in his, feeling the strength of his grip even through the fine kid leather. "Agreed." A knock at the library door interrupted the moment. Mrs. Winters entered after the Duke's acknowledgement, her impassive face revealing nothing of her thoughts at finding her mistress unveiled and in close conversation with her master. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Lady Meryn Draycott has called and insists upon seeing the Duchess. I informed her that you were not receiving visitors today, but she is most persistent." The Duke and Duchess exchanged a glance of perfect understanding. "Show her to the blue drawing room," the Duke said. "The Duchess will receive her in 15 minutes. When Mrs. Winters had departed, the Duke turned to Seren with a raised eyebrow. "Your first test approaches rather sooner than anticipated. Lady Meryn undoubtedly comes to survey the aftermath of last night's drama and report back to her gossip-hungry circle." Seren's voice held more amusement than anxiety. "Shall we disappoint her with composure, Your Grace?" "Indeed." For the first time in their acquaintance, something very like a smile touched the Duke's lips. "But first, a strategic consideration. When we face society together, we should present a more unified appearance than formal correctness allows. What do you suggest?" In answer, he reached for her hand once more, this time removing her glove with deliberate slowness. The unexpected intimacy of the gesture caught her by surprise, but she did not withdraw. His fingers were cool against her skin as he raised her hand and, with perfect formality, brushed his lips against her knuckles. "Let Lady Meryn witness this," he said softly. "The tongue will draw its own conclusions." "A calculated display," Seren observed, though her pulse had quickened at the gesture. "Most effective strategies begin with a foundation of truth, Duchess." He released her hand and offered his arm instead. "Shall we greet our visitor?" Together they left the library, stepping into the sunlit corridor as husband and wife, not merely in legal definition, but in mutual purpose. The battle with society's expectations lay before them, but for the first time since their wedding, Seren felt like an ally rather than an asset in the Duke's calculated campaign. As they approached the blue drawing room where Lady Meryn waited, The Duke spoke in a voice too low for servants to overhear. "One last truth before we face the first of many inquisitors, Duchess. I am not displeased with how our arrangement has evolved thus far." "Nor am I, Your Grace," Seren replied with equal quietness. "Nor am I." Lady Merrin Draycott sat perched on the edge of a blue damask settee, her expression a carefully composed mask of polite concern that did nothing to disguise the avid curiosity in her eyes. She rose as the Duke and Duchess entered the drawing room, her gaze immediately fixing upon Seren's unveiled face with barely concealed shock. "Your Grace." Lady Merrin dipped into a perfect curtsy, though her eyes never left Seren's scar. "And, Your Grace, how kind of you to receive me without prior arrangement. I felt I simply must call to express my concern after the unfortunate disturbance at your ball last evening." "Most thoughtful," the Duke replied with glacial politeness, guiding Seren to a chair before taking a position standing behind it, one hand resting possessively on its carved back. "Though I'm surprised you could spare the time, given how many drawing rooms must be eager for your first-hand account of the proceedings." Lady Merrin's smile tightened. "You misunderstand me, Your Grace. I came not as a gossip, but as a friend. Such a distressing incident must have been particularly trying for the Duchess, being so new to society's ways." "How considerate," Seren replied, her voice mild. "Though I assure you, I am quite recovered from any distress the incident might have caused." Of course. Lady Merrin's gaze kept returning to Seren's scar with the morbid fascination of one who cannot look away from a carriage accident. "I must say, Your Grace, I am surprised to find you receiving visitors without your veil. The Ton had understood that your condition necessitated certain accommodations." "Did they indeed?" Seren smiled serenely. "How fascinating that my face should be the subject of such speculation. I wonder, Lady Merrin, does the Ton discuss your features with equal fervour in your absence?" Lady Merrin blanched. That is to say, one could hardly compare." "My wife," the Duke interjected smoothly, "has chosen to dispense with the veil that society's delicate sensibilities supposedly required. As you can see, their concerns were greatly exaggerated." "Quite." Lady Merrin struggled to regain her composure. "The scar is certainly less severe than rumoured, almost distinguished in its way." "How generous of you to say so," Seren replied, "though I confess I find society's preoccupation with physical appearance rather tiresome. Surely there are matters of greater consequence worthy of discussion, the new trade agreements with Prussia, perhaps, or the educational reforms before Parliament." Lady Merrin blinked, clearly unprepared for such topics. "I leave such weighty matters to the gentleman, naturally." "How limiting for you," Serene observed pleasantly. "His Grace and I often discuss such subjects over breakfast. I find it sharpens the mind for the day ahead." The Duke's hand moved from the chair back to Seren's shoulder, a gesture of approval visible to their visitor. "My wife's insights on the Prussian situation proved remarkably astute. Professor Halwyn evidently believed in educating his daughter beyond the customary accomplishments." Lady Merrin's eyes widened at this casual reference to Seren's disgraced father. "How progressive of His Grace, though one wonders if such scholarly pursuits might distract from more traditional wifely duties." "I assure you my wife fulfills all her duties with exemplary dedication." The Duke's voice carried a subtle emphasis that caused Lady Merrin's cheeks to flush pink. "In fact, I find her intellectual companionship one of the most satisfying aspects of our marriage." The implications hung in the air, neither confirmed nor denied. Lady Merrin reached for her fan, fluttering it rapidly despite the moderate temperature of the room. "I see. How fortunate for you both." Her eyes darted between them, reassessing the relationship she had assumed to be one of cold convenience. "Well, I should not impose upon your time further. I merely wished to convey my sympathies regarding the unfortunate interruption to your ball, and to assure you that in my circles, at least, the incident will be discussed with the utmost discretion." "How kind," Seren murmured. "Though His Grace and I find we have little concern for what is or is not discussed in your circles, Lady Merrin. The truth requires no defence, after all." "Indeed." The Duke moved to pull the bell cord. "Winters will show you out." Dismissed so abruptly, Lady Merrin had no choice but to rise, her dignity somewhat compromised by the haste with which she gathered her reticule and gloves. "I look forward to seeing you both at the Pembrokes musical evening next week," she said, rallying her composure. "I'm sure your appearance will be the talk of the season, Your Grace." "No doubt." Seren rose as well, offering a polite smile that stopped well short of her eyes. "Do give my regards to Lord Hastings. I understand he found our wedding ceremony particularly amusing." Lady Merrin's smile faltered as she realized her private comments at the church had not gone unnoticed. "I shall, of course. Good day, Your Grace, Your Grace." With a final curtsy, she allowed Mrs. Winters to escort her from the room. When the door closed behind their visitor, Seren turned to the Duke with a raised eyebrow. "Traditional wifely duties?" "A calculated implication," he replied, though a hint of colour had risen to his normally pale cheeks. "Lady Merrin will now report that our marriage is not merely one of convenience, thus undermining certain speculations." "Speculations about your reasons for choosing a supposedly disfigured bride?" Seren moved to the window, watching as Lady Merrin's carriage pulled away from the house. "You realize she will now describe my scar in excruciating detail to anyone who will listen." "Of course. And in doing so she will reveal that the Tun's ghoulish imaginings were vastly exaggerated." The Duke joined her at the window. "By tomorrow, half of London will know that the Duchess of Blackmore bears a single scar that does little to diminish her otherwise pleasant appearance. By the end of the week, they will have moved on to fresher scandals." "Is that all I am, then? A pleasant appearance marred by a single scar?" There was no hurt in Seren's voice, merely curiosity. The Duke considered her for a long moment, his pale eyes unusually intent. "No. You are a strategic alliance that has proven more valuable than anticipated. A partner whose intellect might complement my own. Perhaps even—" "Yes," she prompted when he did not continue. Instead of answering directly, he reached out to trace the line of her scar with a gentle fingertip, the unexpected touch causing her breath to catch. "This mark tells a story of courage, Duchess, of principle maintained at great personal cost. I find I respect that far more than the unblemished beauty society prizes so highly." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither had anticipated when they entered into their arrangement. Then the Duke withdrew his hand, his expression resuming its usual impassivity. "We should prepare for dinner," he said. "The Dowager will expect us to dine formally, despite the absence of other guests." "Of course." Seren stepped back, gathering her composure. "Shall I wear the veil this evening, Your Grace?" "I think not." His voice had returned to its customary coolness, yet something in his eyes remained altered. "Let us begin as we mean to continue, Duchess." As they left the drawing-room together, Seren reflected that their marriage, begun as a cold transaction between strangers, had somehow transformed into something far more intriguing in the space of a single day. What it might become in the weeks and months ahead remained to be seen, but for the first time since accepting his proposal, she found herself anticipating the future with something approaching hope. That evening, as they dined with the Dowager Countess, Seren noticed subtle changes in the Duke's behavior, a closer attention to her comments, a willingness to draw her into conversation about political matters that would normally be considered outside a lady's purview, even an occasional glance that lingered longer than strict courtesy required. The Dowager observed these shifts with knowing eyes, but kept her commentary limited to occasional raised eyebrows and significant glances. Only as she prepared to depart the following morning did she pull Serene aside for a private word. "Well, my dear, it seems you've accomplished in 2 days what the Tun's most accomplished beauties failed to achieve in 10 years, the elderly woman said, tapping her cane for emphasis. "I'm not certain I understand your meaning, Your Grace," Seren replied cautiously. "Don't play coy with me, child. You've breached the walls of Blackmore's famous indifference. The man actually looked at you during dinner, not through you or past you, as is his custom with everyone else." The Dowager's shrewd eyes studied Serene's face. "I wonder if you realize what you've begun. A more equitable partnership than originally negotiated, I hope." The Dowager snorted. "Partnership? Is that what young people call it these days? Very well, if you insist on such prosaic terminology. But remember this, my godson does nothing by half measures. Once engaged, his full attention is a force few can withstand, for better or worse. I am not afraid of the Duke's attention, Your Grace." "No, I don't believe you are." The Dowager patted Seren's cheek with surprising gentleness. "And that, my dear, is precisely why you might succeed where others have failed. Courage impresses him. Always has since he was a boy." As the Dowager's carriage pulled away later that morning, Seren stood on the front steps beside her husband, contemplating this new phase of their arrangement. The veil that had concealed her face at their wedding now lay folded in a drawer, perhaps never to be worn again. The scar that society had whispered about would soon become merely another fact about the Duchess of Blackmore, no more remarkable than the colour of her hair or the cut of her gowns. "What are you thinking, Duchess?" the Duke inquired as they turned to re-enter the house. Seren met his gaze directly, no longer hidden behind silk and shame. "I am thinking that truth, however inconvenient, provides a firmer foundation than comfortable deception." "Indeed." His hand came to rest briefly at the small of her back as they crossed the threshold, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. And what truth shall we face next, I wonder? The truth that our marriage has evolved beyond its original purpose, she replied with quiet certainty. The question is, what shall we make of it now? His answer came not in words, but in the subtle shift of his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight easing of the perpetual tension in his jaw. It was not a declaration of love, nor even of affection, but something equally meaningful, acknowledgement of possibility. Together they entered Ironvale House, no longer merely Duke and Duchess, husband and wife in name only, but two people standing at the threshold of a future neither had imagined possible when they spoke their vows beneath the judging eyes of London society. 1 year later, the ballroom of Ironvale House glittered with the light of 1,000 candles as London's elite gathered for what had become the most coveted invitation of the season. The annual Blackmore Ball, once a sombre affair attended more from obligation than pleasure, had transformed under the Duchess's guidance into an event that seamlessly blended intellectual discourse with social elegance. Sirene stood at the entrance to the ballroom, greeting guests with composed grace, the silver scar on her cheek now as much a part of her public persona as her reputation for wit and charitable works. Beside her, the Duke maintained his customary reserve, yet those who knew him well noticed subtle changes. The occasional touch of his hand against his wife's back, the way his gaze followed her movements through the room, the slight softening of his expression when she spoke. "Your Grace?" Lady Pembroke curtsied deeply as she reached the receiving line. "Such a magnificent gathering. I declare, you've quite revolutionized the concept of a society ball." "You are too kind, Lady Pembroke," Sirene replied, "though I believe the credit belongs to His Grace for permitting the innovations." "Permitting?" The Duke raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I believe, my dear, that encouraging would be more accurate." The exchange, witnessed by several nearby guests, sent a ripple of surprised whispers through the crowd. The Duke of Blackmore, known for his icy demeanor and ruthless business practices, publicly acknowledging his wife's influence, and with something approaching affection, no less. As the evening progressed, Sirene moved among the guests with easy confidence, as comfortable discussing the latest parliamentary debates with senior statesmen as she was admiring the needlework of debutantes. The scar that had once been the subject of lurid speculation now went largely unremarked, though new acquaintances sometimes cast curious glances when first introduced. Near the refreshment table, Lady Meryn Draycott held court among a circle of eager listeners. "Of course, I was the first to call upon her after she abandoned that ridiculous veil," she confided, conveniently revising history. "I told Blackmore directly that society would accept his wife regardless of her appearance, if only he would give us the chance." "How remarkably progressive of you, Lady Meryn," came a cool voice from behind her. The Dowager Countess of Blackwood approached, leaning heavily on her cane yet still commanding instant respect. "Though I recall your reaction to my goddaughter's unveiled face somewhat differently. Something about damaged goods, was it not?" Lady Meryn flushed crimson. "Your Grace misunderstands. I merely meant to convey my admiration for the Duchess's courage in facing society despite her misfortune." "Did you indeed?" The Dowager's smile was razor-sharp. "How curious that your admiration manifested as mockery at their wedding ceremony, but perhaps my old ears deceived me." Across the ballroom, unaware of this exchange, the Duke stood in conversation with Lord Chancellor Harwick. Their discussion focused on the upcoming vote regarding educational reform, a cause the Duchess had championed with surprising effectiveness over the past months. "Your wife has made quite an impression on the committee, Blackmore," Harwick observed. "Her paper on female education was remarkably persuasive. Several votes swung in favour after its circulation. The Duchess has a gift for presenting logical arguments in a manner that disarms rather than antagonizes," the Duke replied, his gaze finding Sirene among the crowd. "A skill I have come to value most highly." "Indeed," Harwick followed his gaze. "One might almost say she has had a similar effect on you, old friend. There was a time when the mere mention of compromise would have ended our conversation." The Duke did not deny the observation. "Marriage, I have discovered, offers unexpected lessons in the value of strategic alliance." "Is that what you call it?" Harwick chuckled. "My wife would be most disappointed to hear our 30 years together reduced to such clinical terms." A footman approached with a message, interrupting their conversation. The Duke read the note quickly, his expression changing in a way that caused Harwick to step back in surprise. "If you'll excuse me," the Duke said, already moving toward the ballroom doors. "A matter requires my immediate attention." He found Sirene in the small antechamber off the main entrance, standing with her lady's maid and the family physician. Her face was pale but composed, her hand resting lightly on the back of a chair for support. "You should have sent for me sooner." he said, dismissing the servants with a glance. "And interrupt your conversation with the Lord Chancellor." She offered a small smile. "The matter has been handled, Your Grace. Dr. Winters has merely confirmed what we suspected." The Duke closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "You are certain?" "Quite certain. In approximately 7 months' time, the Blackmore nursery will require reopening." Her voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened around his. "Are you pleased with this development?" For a moment, his customary mask of control slipped entirely, revealing an expression she had seen only in their most private moments, a vulnerability at odds with his public persona. "Pleased seems an inadequate word, Duchess." He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture that had evolved from calculated display to genuine affection over the course of their marriage. "Are you well? Should you retire from the festivities?" "I am perfectly well, and I have no intention of retiring when half of London's most influential citizens are gathered in our ballroom," she replied with quiet determination. "The announcement can wait until an appropriate moment. Tonight belongs to your educational initiative." "Our initiative," he corrected, offering his arm with formal correctness that belied the new warmth in his eyes, as with so many things these past 12 months. Together they returned to the ballroom, presenting the same united front they had cultivated since that pivotal day when the veil had been set aside. Yet those with discerning eyes might have noticed subtle changes, his hand covering hers where it rested on his arm, a step matching his with practiced ease, the private glance they exchanged before separating to attend to their guests. Later that night, when the last carriage had departed down the torchlit drive, they stood together on the terrace, watching the first snowflakes of winter spiral down from the night sky. "A successful evening," the Duke observed, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Harwick believes the vote will pass with a comfortable majority." "And Lady Merrin received a much-deserved setback from your godmother," Seren added, amusement colouring her voice. "I do believe the Dowager takes more pleasure in defending my honour than strictly necessary. She has grown fond of you." He drew her cloak more securely around her shoulders, his touch lingering, "as have many who once whispered behind their fans at the mere mention of your name. Including you, Your Grace?" She turned to face him, the scar silvered by moonlight, her eyes holding his with the directness that had first caught his attention. "I never whispered behind fans," he replied with unusual lightness, "though I will admit to certain misconceptions when we first entered our arrangement. Such as believing you required a disfigured wife to maintain your splendid isolation?" She smiled to soften the words. "Or that I would be suitably grateful for rescue to make no demands upon your privacy." Both grievous miscalculations. His hand came to rest against her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her scar with familiar tenderness. "Yet I find I cannot regret them, given where they have led us. A year ago, such an admission would have been unthinkable from the most feared duke in England. A year ago, Seren would have flinched from any touch that drew attention to her marred face. Now she leaned into his caress with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth extended far beyond physical appearance. "Where indeed?" she murmured. "From a marriage of convenience to a partnership I value above all others," he completed, "and soon, to a family I never expected to desire." Snow continued to fall around them, transforming the formal gardens into a landscape of pristine white. Inside Ironvale House, servants extinguished the ballroom candles one by one, their light fading as a new day approached. The Duke of Blackmore, once feared throughout London for his ruthless detachment, drew his wife closer, against the winter chill. The Duchess of Blackmore, once mocked for a scar that society had never truly seen, rested her head against his shoulder with the ease of hard-won intimacy. Together they stood in comfortable silence, no longer merely playing parts in a strategic arrangement, but building something neither had dared hope for when they spoke their vows beneath the judgmental eyes of London society. A marriage not merely of convenience or calculation, but of genuine respect, deepening affection and mutual understanding. The veil that had once concealed Seren's face now lay folded in a drawer, a relic of the past. The fear that had once governed the Duke's every decision had gradually yielded to something more complex and rewarding, and the whispers that had once followed them through London's drawing rooms had transformed from cruel mockery to reluctant admiration. As they turned to enter the warmth of their home, a final snowflake settled on the Duchess's scarred cheek before melting away, transient as the tun's cruelty, fleeting as physical beauty, insignificant against the more enduring bond they had forged together, one truthful conversation at a time. In the silent spaces between judgment and understanding lies the most profound truth of all. That which society mocks often conceals the greatest worth, and the scars we bear are not disfigurements, but testimonies to our courage. The Duke and Serene's journey reminds us that true beauty emerges not from flawless appearances, but from the integrity with which we face our deepest wounds. Their story whispers to us that the most meaningful connections form not when we hide behind veils of pretense, but when we dare to stand revealed, imperfections and all. Perhaps in our own lives, the path to genuine intimacy begins with the willingness to be seen, not as the perfect beings we pretend to be, but as the scarred yet resilient souls we truly are. For it is not in concealment, but in honest revelation that we find not merely acceptance, but the profound dignity of being truly known and, despite everything, chosen. Did this tale of hidden scars and unexpected love touch your heart? If you found yourself captivated by the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore's journey from cold arrangement to genuine affection, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional Victorian romances that explore the healing power of love against society's harshest judgments. Leave a comment sharing which moment moved you most. Was it when the veil finally fell, or perhaps that tender gesture on the snowy terrace? Your thoughts help us create more stories that speak to the courage required to love beyond appearances. Subscribe now and join our community of romance enthusiasts who believe that every scar tells a story worth hearing, and every heart, however guarded, deserves to be understood.